Coming up in New Day at Arirang. South Korea is expected to see more than 1,000 new COVID-19 infections Tuesday, a day after the nation began observing its new and final social distancing measures before shifting to the Living with COVID-19 scheme. Top security officials from Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo could meet in the coming hours for discussions on the current situation on the Korean peninsula following North Korea's recent missile launches. And OPEC Plus's compliance to its pledged oil cuts fell slightly in September, showing that while it raised production targets, some members are falling short.
Hello and welcome to this Tuesday edition of New Day at Arirang. I'm Mark Broom. It's 8 a.m. Korea time on October 19th here in Seoul, South Korea.
And I'm Kim Mo-gyan. As usual, we have a packed show for you over the next hour. We'll be taking a look at the big news stories of the day and get expert insights on the issues facing Korea and the world.
Let's start where we have been doing most editions of New Day at Arirang on the coronavirus situation in South Korea. We have some rather good news today. The country has been seeing a decrease in daily infections over the last few weeks. It has left most of us wondering if South Korea might have finally turned the corner on this pandemic.
Yes, we hope so. Now, to fill us in on the latest, we have our reporter Kim Yeon-sing joining us in the studio with us. Good morning, Yeon-sing.
Good morning.
Now, so tell us, Yeon-sing, where does South Korea stand in terms of COVID-19?
Well, as of 9 p.m. last night, health authorities logged in 1,039 new cases. Tuesday's morning's official tally isn't out yet, but health authorities are expecting another day with low numbers, just over 1,000. On Monday morning, South Korea confirmed its lowest number of daily cases in 103 days, 1,050, and Tuesday is expected to bring a similar figure.
So this naturally leads to the question in most people's mind, why is this happening now? What can we attribute to this general downtrend we're seeing?
Well, health authorities are connecting the dots between the declining infections and the climbing vaccination rate. Son Young-rae, an official at the Central Disaster Management Headquarters, said during a briefing Monday that it's evident COVID-19 infections are gradually receding. They've been trying to pinpoint all the factors that could have come into play, and they realized the index numbers that point to the frequency of how often people make social contact and how much people go out during the weekends have actually been quite high. So it's unlikely the decrease in infections was brought on by social distancing. Really, the only thing different that the health authorities could identify was the vaccination rates. So they are suspecting that the vaccination rates have come into play when bringing down the numbers.
Right. Now, Yeon-sing, what about other countries? Are they also seeing a drop in new infections as well?
Unfortunately, some are, but some aren't. For example, the UK on Monday reported its highest daily caseload since mid-July, more than 49,000 cases. Britain has been seeing a 60% increase in COVID-19 infections for the past month, and they are reporting much higher numbers compared to other Western countries. And it's all despite the fact that UK has vaccinated more than 65% of the population. Some health experts attribute this to the fact that they were relatively early in easing COVID-19 restrictions and slow in rolling out the vaccines to adolescents. So a lot of children went back to school without immunization, and now the country is seeing the result. Japan, on the other hand, witnessed a rather puzzling success in bringing down its COVID-19 infections. They confirmed just 232 new cases on Monday, the first time in more than a year that the daily count has been under 300. I'm sure you remember in August, before Japan hosted the Tokyo Olympics, many were concerned because the nation was seeing up to 20,000 cases a day as they headed into this major international event. And then almost overnight, relatively speaking, of course, they saw this stunning success in bringing the numbers down. Health experts don't know why yet. They say it could have been the high vaccination rate, which is now close to 70%, or the social distancing controls, which mainly focused on shutting down the nightlife, or it could have been due to less testing.
Okay, so different countries moving at different speeds in terms of vaccinations and the number of new infections, where they're going up and down. Tell us more about the different nations that have already gone through this process. South Korea is about to start next month. This kind of living with COVID-19, transitioning from it being a pandemic to something that's going to be with us pretty much forever, like seasonal influenza. How are these different countries that have already started that strategy faring right now?
Well, let's start with Israel, which is known as a poster child for a successful vaccination campaign. Their living with COVID strategy was highly controversial at first, and they've pushed through with booster shots, vaccine passports, and mask mandates. And now, just a little over a month after peaking in early September, they finally turned a corner. Daily infections fell more than 80%, and severe cases also went down by a half in recent days. Singapore has also dived into living with COVID earlier this month, despite reporting high numbers. More than 2,500 new cases on Monday. Their strategy involves no dining in for the unvaccinated, no more required quarantining for people who came into close contact, and more home recovery. It's too early to say how their strategy will come into play, but hopefully we can learn more from that.
Yunsun, thank you so much again for your efforts today. I will talk to you again in our lunchtime edition of our Arirang News.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're going to stick with coronavirus in regards to South Korea, because this country is sticking with its overall distancing measures for another 2 weeks, but there are some adjustments being made. These revisions include an increase in the permitted size of private gatherings and later opening hours for movie theatres, restaurants and coffee shops.
And this is the prelude to a scheme dubbed Living with COVID-19 starting in November that'll lead the way back to normal life. Our Peninsula has more.
Under the new social distancing rules, Seoul and the surrounding areas are still at the highest level of social distancing, level 4, and the rest of the country at level 3. But starting this week, movie theaters and performance halls in the Seoul area can now stay open 2 hours longer, until midnight. And with the National College entrance exam approaching, study cafes can too. Outside the capital region, the extended hours also apply to restaurants and ordinary cafes. As for limits on private gatherings in the capital region, they can have up to 8 people, up from the current cap of 6. This is permitted regardless of whether it's before or after 6 p.m. But at least 4 people in the group have to be fully vaccinated. Elsewhere in the country, gatherings of up to 10 people will be allowed, as long as 6 people are vaccinated. And as for weddings across the country, up to 250 people can attend the events, as long as the number of unvaccinated is capped at 49. On the first day of the new measures, people seem to be welcoming the eased restrictions, in hopes of getting the economy back to normal.
The vaccination rate is pretty high now, and new daily cases have fallen to the 1400s after being above 2000 for a couple of weeks. So I personally think that, considering the economy, it's better to start slowly easing the measures.
Another Seoul resident that came to watch a movie said he does think it's great that we are going back to normal, but showed concerns about people lowering their guard.
I think it's great that things are returning to how they were before the pandemic, but I think people should follow the rules strictly.
An owner of a coffee shop says this should have been done sooner, and hopes they'll let cafes stay open later too.
I think the easing of the rules on gatherings will be effective, but I think this should have been done sooner. Also, the people do tend to come to our coffee shop after 10 p.m., so I hope they will change the rule on operating hours.
It seems the new social distancing rules are welcomed by both small business owners and the public, as the government prepares for a shift to living with the coronavirus early next month. Peninsula, Arirang News.
U.S. Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines, who's in South Korea, sat down on Monday with Seoul's top security official to discuss North Korea. Haines met privately with Seoul-hoon, President Moon Jae-in's top security advisor, for discussions on the current situation on the Korean peninsula, as well as ways to further bolster the South Korea-U.S. alliance. They reportedly exchanged their assessments of the security situation on the Korean peninsula following the regime's recent missile launches. Watchers say Japan's intelligence chief could join them for more discussions in the coming hours. North Korea's exports to China more than doubled on month in September to around $14.3 million. Data from China's General Administration of Customs also revealed the regime's September exports to China were about 88% of what they were 2 years prior, before the COVID-19 forced the North to shut its border. Chinese exports to North Korea rose from $22.5 million in August to $55.6 million last month. Two-way trade volume was just under $17 million, the highest since July 2020, but a fraction of what it was pre-pandemic.
Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to dig deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. Despite North Korea's apparent reluctance to engage in talks with anyone apart from its only real international ally, China, North Korea-related diplomacy continues apace. On Monday, as we just heard from Mo-kyun there, the intel chiefs of South Korea and the US met behind closed doors in Seoul for talks that almost certainly revolved around the North and related issues. Their counterpart from Japan is reportedly set to join them in the coming hours.
For more, we are joined on Skype by Professor Ramon Pacheco Pardo, Professor of International Relations at King's College London and the author of the book North Korea-US Relations from Kim Jong-il to Kim Jong-un. Professor, good morning.
Thanks for having me.
We hear the intel chief from Japan will join his South Korean and U.S. counterparts soon, given the regime's missile launches in recent weeks and its lack of response to Washington's efforts to reach out. Can we speculate on what specifically they might discuss, and is there any significance to the timing of this meeting?
Well, I think the assumptions they're going to discuss a couple of issues. The first one, of course, the recent missile launches conducted by North Korea, the unveiling of potentially new weapon systems, and what does this mean for South Korea, for the US, and for Japan, and how they can protect themselves against these new weapons being developed by North Korea. And secondly, the expectation is that they will also keep on discussing how to try to resume dialogue with Pyongyang, because we have seen, obviously, the South Korean government is keen to resume dialogue, but also the Biden administration. And if this is the case, they have to try to coordinate their actions, and they have to make sure that they provide the right mix of incentives for North Korea to come to the negotiation table.
And these series of meetings here in Seoul regarding the intelligence chiefs comes as the chief nuclear envoys of the three sides have been meeting or are about to meet in Washington. So is it fair to say that the three sides are really pushing hard to try whatever they can do to get the North back to talks? And what incentives do you think Pyongyang actually wants before it says, okay, let's talk?
I think it is fair to say that they're really coordinated, especially South Korea and the US, how to try to resume diplomacy, to resume dialogue before President Moon leaves office in the spring of next year. But I think that when it comes to coordination among the three of them, or at least between Seoul and Washington, there might still be some differences in terms of what incentives to offer. I think South Korea would be willing to be more open to offer economic incentives that the US seems not to be willing to offer at this point, for example, in terms of sanctions relief, or at the very least interruption of application of sanctions. So I think that there's still some differences between Seoul and Washington, not as big as they have been reported, but it is true that they still have to find a middle ground between the concessions that they're willing to make as a starting point, or the incentives they're willing to make as a starting point to bring Pyongyang back to the negotiation table.
Now, Professor, in terms of Washington's North Korea policies, it's been around 10 months since the Biden administration took office, but it seems like Pyongyang is still hesitant to talk to the current administration. How do you rate his North Korea policy to that of his predecessor?
They're quite different, right? So I think it's the right approach. I think what we saw with President Trump after the first big summit in Singapore is that there was really nothing behind it, nothing to sustain diplomacy between the U.S. and North Korea. And I think that makes sense to try to coordinate with Seoul, with Tokyo to an extent, and create the conditions for a sustainable dialogue, bottom-up dialogue, starting with working level talks. Having said that, we're in the middle of the pandemic, and obviously North Korea has closed its borders essentially since January 2020. So at some point, the US might have to try to come up with a way to have a dialogue with North Korea that doesn't involve face-to-face talks. This probably will be some sort of online meeting, for example, but North Korea has been reluctant to this when it comes to diplomacy. So I think here's the problem with the approach of the Biden administration, the response from North Korea, that they're very far apart when it comes to the mode of communication, because North Korea, I think, is not as open as we would like to have this online dialogue with the US or with any other country, really.
Yeah, and it seems that President Biden has his hands full with domestic issues as well right now, so perhaps he isn't really concentrating too much on North Korea, with him trying to pass his massive infrastructure bill. But finally, before we let you go, the Pentagon has released this assessment saying it's highly unlikely North Korea is ever going to surrender its nuclear weapons, calling them a bargaining chip that the regime's leadership consider absolutely vital to its very survival. Now, that is hardly groundbreaking news. So are these endless stream of meetings, bilateral, trilateral talks, really doing nothing more than just having the three sides reaffirm their positions and kicking the can down the road, so to speak?
I think that the issue here is that obviously this has no easy solution, otherwise we would have been solved years, if not decades ago. But I think the issue here is that it is right. For the US, clearly the priority in terms of foreign policy is China. That's number one, number two, and number three. And North Korea and other issues are really secondary, never mind the domestic agenda that you were mentioning. And I think what we see here is that if North Korea at some point, which we think it will, reopens the border, re-engages in diplomacy, I think what the US and South Korea want, together with Japan, is make sure that the positions align and that there are no disagreements between the countries that would have to negotiate with North Korea. The problem, of course, is that we don't know how long it will take for North Korea to come back to the negotiation table, and that it is true that for the Biden administration, the current situation is comfortable because it can keep on focusing on China, and it is showing that it's open to dialogue. So to an extent, Washington could argue that it is up to Pyongyang to accept the offer to negotiate with the US, with South Korea, and with other countries as well.
Unfortunately, we are out of time, Professor, but we thank you as always for your insights, and we do look forward to speaking to you again in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, adding to the already mounting tensions between the U.S. and China, Beijing has reportedly tested a nuclear-capable hypersonic missile.
China also seemingly managed to plan it out, this launch anyway, without alerting American intelligence agencies. Kim Hyo-sun with the details.
The U.S. government has expressed concern over reports China recently tested a nuclear-capable hypersonic glide weapon. Quoting numerous sources familiar with the matter, the Financial Times said Beijing tested the weapon in August and that it caught U.S. intelligence by surprise. In response, Washington's disarmament ambassador Robert Wood expressed deep concern while speaking in Geneva, adding no country knows how to detect or intercept such advanced technology at the current time. Hypersonic weapons are difficult to defend against as they fly at lower altitudes than ballistic missiles, but at over 5 times the speed of sound. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said Washington is closely monitoring China's development of armaments and advanced military technology, but he refused to comment directly on the report in the Financial Times. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki also said the Biden administration is concerned about the report, but stressed that U.S. policy toward China remains consistent.
Just generally speaking, we've made clear our concern about the military capabilities that the PRC continues to pursue. And we have been consistent in our approach with China. We welcome stiff competition, but we do not want that competition to veer into conflict, and that is certainly what we convey privately as well.
China's foreign ministry denied the report, instead claiming it was a routine test of a space vehicle.
It is a routine test of the spacecraft to verify the reusability technology of the vehicle. This is of great significance for reducing the use cost of spacecraft and could provide a convenient and affordable way to make a round trip for mankind's peaceful use of space.
The spokesperson also said the trial happened in July, not August, adding many countries have conducted similar tests. China's space program is run by the Chinese military and thus is closely tied to its agenda of developing hypersonic missiles and other next-generation tech that could possibly upset the balance of power with the U.S. Kim Hye-sun, Arirang News.
The South Korean government aims to slash carbon emissions by 40% by 2030 and ultimately achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. Once it's approved next week by the cabinet, the country will unveil the new target at the UN Climate Change Conference in November. Kim Min-ji with this report.
South Korea's carbon reduction target of 40% by 2030 reflects the country's strong determination to achieve carbon neutrality and its sense of responsibility as a member of the international community. That's according to President Moon Jae-in Monday as the country finalized its blueprint for zero-out emissions by 2050. The new target, known as a nationally determined contribution, is a dramatic hike from the current goal of a 26.3% drop from 2018 levels, the year the country's emissions peaked.
국가의 명운이 걸린 일입니다. 정부는 기업들에게만 그 부담을 넘기지 않고 정책적, 재정적 지원을 아끼지 않겠습니다. 국민들도 행동으로 나설 때입니다.
Moon said that it's an ambitious target, noting the concerns of industry and labor about whether the country can manage, especially as the manufacturing sector takes up a large portion of the country's industrial structure. In fact, South Korea needs to reduce its emissions by over 4% a year on average until 2030, which is about twice as much as countries whose emissions peaked earlier in the 1990s or 2000s. The government on Monday also finalized two scenarios for net zero carbon emissions by the year 2050 to give the country flexibility given that conditions can change, focusing on developing and expanding sources for carbon absorption. The president noted that over $10 billion is being earmarked from next year's budget for the initiative. Moon pointed out the need for a transition to renewable energy and to supply more electric and hydrogen-powered cars.
아무도 가보지 않은 길을 당당히 가겠다는 원대한 목표입니다. 무엇보다 저탄소 기술 확보가 국가 경쟁력을 좌우하는 시대입니다. 정부는 기술 개발 투자를 늘리고 탄소 중립 시대를 이끌어 나갈 미래 신성장 동력 확보와 새로운 일자리 창출에 전력을 다할 것입니다.
Monday's proposal will be subject to cabinet approval next week, after which South Korea will announce at the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow in November. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
OPEC Plus's compliance to its pledged oil cuts fell slightly in September, showing that while it raised production targets, some members are falling short. Citing sources, Reuters reported Monday that members like Angola and Nigeria failed to raise output due to underinvestment and maintenance issues. It is a problem that's expected to continue impacting Western African producers for the foreseeable future. Saudi Arabia is also defending its policy of gradual production hikes. Gradual stress there, despite calls from major consumers like the US to further raise supplies as oil prices spike. And on that note, gasoline prices have hit an all-time high here in South Korea. In Seoul, the price per litre is currently $1.50, with some gas stations charging around 25% higher. The spike is mainly being attributed to a drop in global supply, but rising demand. Shin Ye-eun with the details.
Gasoline prices are soaring around the world, including in South Korea. As of this Monday, gasoline prices in Seoul passed 1,800 won per liter, which is around $1.50 US. A few stations were as high as 2,500 won, which is more than $2. According to OpenNet, a website run by Korea National Oil Corporation that compiles oil price information, the average price in Seoul on Monday was 1,801 Korean won per liter. This was a 4.4 won jump from the day before. Nationwide, the average price had risen to more than 1,700 won, the highest in 7 years. Market watchers say gas prices may even go up higher, with global oil prices on the rise due to revived demand from more countries steadily recovering from the pandemic. Experts also cited the rise in import bills of oil products due to the Korean won currently being weak against the US dollar. South Korea's benchmark Dubai crude reached a 3-year high of $82.28 US a barrel last week, which was up from an average of $72.63 in September. There's a growing call for the government to lower fuel taxes to ease the burden on businesses and ordinary citizens. Higher oil prices normally result to more expensive heating bills. In November 2018, the South Korean government cut fuel taxes for 6 months. At the time, the price jumped due to growing concerns over a drop in crude oil supply when conflicts arose between the U.S. and Iran. Shin Ye-eun, Arirang News.
Now it's time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. As the main stage of global politics moves from the transatlantic to the Indo-Pacific region, the European Union is also looking east. Amid what it's defined as a systematic rivalry with China, the EU recently unveiled its own Indo-Pacific strategy, aiming to expand its engagement in the region, from increasing trade and investment to fostering digital partnerships. Now, South Korea and the EU have enjoyed strong bilateral relations and a strategic partnership, which looks set to deepen in the months to come. We discussed the relationship today with the Republic of Korea's ambassador to Belgium, Luxembourg, the EU and NATO, Mr. Yoon Sung-go. It's an incredible honour to have you on today. Sir, thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
It's quite early there in the morning in Belgium. How are you today, sir?
I feel good. So all of our staff get vaccinated fully. So, we are on the verge of getting back to normal life here in Brussels.
Well, that's great to hear. And it's great to hear that our respective societies, are getting back to normal. And while there's been a lot of exciting developments in South Korean diplomacy recently with the UN General Assembly last month in September, and of course a lot of other events coming up. But today we want to focus on South Korea-EU relations, and well, our bilateral ties were mostly centred on the two-way FTA, but now it looks like the two sides are going beyond traditional trade-focused ties to wider value-based partnership. How has the relationship been evolving over the years, and where is it heading in the future?
It is true, Korea and European Union FTA has played a vital role in cementing our bilateral ties. However, now Korea-European Union partnership goes beyond traditional trade-centered ties. The two sides under the strategic partnership have cooperated closely in all sectors, including economy, trade, climate change, and science and technology global governance, based on shared values and strong commitment to global stability and prosperity. Korea is the first country in the world to have concluded three core agreements with the European Union, namely Framework Agreement, Korea-EU FTA, and Crisis Management Agreement. 40 or more high-level dialogue on extensive areas of mutual interest that take place on a regular basis, including the summit. By doing so, we have built a strong strategic partnership, not only in economic sector, but also in anti-piracy, counterterrorism, as well as on regional and security, including Korean Peninsula issues. There were also some fruitful outcomes, such as South Korea's ratification of key ILO conventions and European Union's initial adequacy decisions of GDPR. And finally, Korea's declaration of 2050 carbon neutrality. Indeed, Korea and the European Union have been and will remain very attractive partners to each other. As you well know, the Europeans' flagship policies under the current leadership, namely a European Green Deal and Europe Fit for the Digital Age, are very much in line with our government Korean New Deal that focuses on green and digital transformations. Therefore, I believe a mutually beneficial marriage of interest is possible between two sides.
Right, a lot of overlapping areas, it seems, very ripe for collaboration. And, well, after months and months, the EU's Indo-Pacific strategy is finally out. And, well, having looked into the details, what does it really mean for South Korea?
Europe and the Indo-Pacific are already intertwined in many respects. But there's still more potential for these two regions to closely work together. We welcome that the European Union is seeking to expand cooperation with engagement with the regions, as demonstrated in the recent joint communications in its Indo-Pacific strategy. In particular, I noted that the European Union's strategy focuses on its engagement, cooperation, and coordination with its partners in the region, rather than geopolitical competitions. Korea has also been pursuing its own regional initiative called New Southern Policy to expand cooperation in these regions since 2017. I believe Korea's New Southern Policy and European Union's Indo-Pacific strategies are very much in line with each other, simply because these two initiatives aims at cooperation with the regional partners while maintaining such guiding principles as rules-based order, inclusiveness, openness, and transparency to bring peace and stability in this region.
And while the EU is looking to expand its trade and investment opportunities in the Indo-Pacific, and it's actually been 10 years since the South Korea-EU Free Trade Agreement went into force in July of 2011. And while bearing in mind that this was the EU's very first trade pact with an Asian country, are there opportunities for closer economic relations between the two sides?
Korea-European Union FTA is distinctively characterized by two facts. First, it is a model trade agreement with realize a high-level and comprehensive market opening. Second, it is the EU's first new generation FTA, which includes a chapter on sustainable development. Over the past decade, Korea and European Union FTA has played a preeminent role in expanding both trade and investment volume. Currently, the European Union is Korea's third largest trading partner and the largest foreign investor for Korea, while Korea is European Union's ninth largest trading partner. I can assure you that a much brighter future lies ahead when it comes to the economic cooperation between Korea and the European Union. The Korean government and European Commissions share the converging ideas with regard to environment and digital. This similarity will open up a myriad of opportunities for economic cooperation in the future of these two areas.
I see, and a growing number of South Korean nationals and businesses are establishing their presence in the EU market and also creating a lot of local jobs. What has been the impact of Korean businesses in the EU, and what kind of preparation is needed to encourage further positive engagement and expansion?
Korea and European Union FTA has allowed many Korean companies to enter the European Union market through trade and investment. All the more impressive is the fact that the global recession caused by the pandemic last year did not deal a blow to our solid economic cooperations. Our bilateral trade volume in 2020 recorded about 103 billion US dollars, an increase of 3.8% compared to the previous years. This is the second highest volume recorded since we signed FTA. In order to keep this positive curve, I think that we need to keep a vigilant eye on the transformation of the European Union's rules and regulations, especially in such areas as digital, environment, labor, and protection of personal information, subsidies, to name a few. In this regard, I'd like to bring your attention to the European Union's recently unveiled policy on environment and labor standard. Last July, European Union Commission announced the Fit for 55 package with the aim of achieving climate neutrality by 2050. This package has implications for Korean companies because it involves a carbon border adjustment mechanism and ban on sales of combustion engines across the bloc. In addition, the European Commission is working on a new legislation of due diligence so that companies exporting or investing into the EU are not affiliated with forced labor in their value chains. The Korean government will make its utmost effort to minimize the negative impact on our companies by closely reviewing the European Union's new policy.
And well, you did mention the environment there, and of course the environment and climate change are among the key areas that Korea and the EU can cooperate on, as they have both set out their net zero initiatives and green deals, as you mentioned previously. What are the prospects for collaboration in these areas?
Currently, countries are actively working toward gaining a competitive edge in eco-friendly industries such as hydrogens and renewable energy, which are predicted to be a highly profitable industry in the near future. We could produce a lot of synergy by combining European Union's original technology and Korea's competitive edge in manufacturing know-how. Being at the forefront of taking on climate change, the European Union has come up with the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is called CBAM. However, some stakeholders have some concerns regarding this mechanism. When it comes to addressing climate change, Korea is playing a bridge role between developed and developing countries. Korea has also introduced its own emission trading systems, a mechanism similar to CBAM. Against this backdrop, I believe there are much room for further cooperation in this domain. Eventually, enhanced green cooperation between two sides can help European Union's eco-friendly policy generate the support in the global stage.
With South Korea and the EU both being hubs of science and technology as well, and a lot of new emerging technologies, hopefully we'll see more and more collaboration in this regard. And well, in addition to climate change, though, there is huge potential for Korea and the EU to cooperate with regards to digital technology, and that's certainly what the EU has outlined in its recent Indo-Pacific strategy. Now, that is aiming to explore a digital partnership with Seoul. How do you see cooperation in this area progressing?
Yes, there's a huge potential for deepening cooperations in the area of ICT and digital economy, where both Korea and the European Union has prowess and share aligned policy objectives. We have recently witnessed some eye-catching progress with regard to digital cooperations. The process of GDPR adequacy decision is nearing the completions after the European Data Protection Board adopted overall positive opinions on the adequacy decision for Korea last week. If that happens, both the citizens and companies in Korea and the European Union can enjoy economic gains arising from safe and free flow of data. On top of that, Korea and the European Union initiated the first level policy dialogue on digital economy in November 2020, which allowed for rich and intensive exchanges on our convergent approach on digital policies. Digital technology are key to building up national competitiveness in the fourth industrial revolution, as well as solving global challenges faced by humanity. Korea and the European Union will continue to explore ways to spearhead the digital era, as they agree with the need to strengthen cooperation associated with the digital transitions.
And well, to be frank, things really haven't been the same since the global financial crisis. And it's clear that multilateralism is critically needed to overcome and address very pressing global uncertainties, disputes, and other such challenges. Do you see South Korea and the EU countries playing a greater role in global governance?
I'd like to reiterate that both Korea and the European Union are guided by the common values and principles, including the rule of law, democracy, human rights, the market economy, and commitment to global peace and prosperity. We are engaging in close dialogue regarding global issues through many avenues. Upholding a rules-based multilateralism is certainly in the interest of both Korea and the European Union, as we have witnessed a strong rivalry between the United States and China. Two sides, as a like-minded group, have actively cooperated each other in many global governance mechanisms, including the United Nations, G20, WTO, etc. I'd like to take the good examples of our cooperation in preparing for a future pandemics. Along with other leaders, President Moon Jae-in and President of the European Council, Mr. Michel, called for a new international treaty to prepare for a future pandemics. In the articles published last March. On top of that, the Korean government and 27 European member states joined in proposing the resolution on strengthening WHO preparedness for and the response to health emergencies last May at the World Health Organization.
Well, no one could deny the explosive reaction that South Korean boy band BTS saw after their joint speech at the UN General Assembly last month. What do you think about the potential of a K-pop or Hallyu or the wave of Korean culture in terms of spreading these global values and raising important issues like climate change?
Well, Korean pop culture is really appealing to the European citizens. Last week, we managed to organize a Korean Cultural Day where around 50,000 Europeans gathered together to watch Korea's pop performance. It's really, it's important. It's a really important asset to promote Korea's image across the world. Hallyu or K-pop is quite effective tools to promote, our ideas and attracting this Korean culture.
I see, and well, there's a lot more to look forward to, it seems, with a lot of key international events coming up. And well, it was an incredible honor to have you on the show, Ambassador. Thank you so much for joining the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me once again.
One of Northeast Asia's biggest exhibitions on the aerospace and defense industries is set to get underway in Seoul in the coming hours. Visitors can see the latest technology, including some that will send South Korea's first all-domestically developed space rocket into orbit this week. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Up and away. South Korea's Air Force Black Eagles blast through the skies of Seongnam above Seoul Air Base, where this year's Seoul International Aerospace and Defense Exhibition is being held this week. On the ground, mock-ups of fighter jets are on display. Also, spectators can get a rare close-up look at some 68 different kinds of military aircraft and equipment currently used by the South Korean military. Due to the pandemic, the general public can only visit this year's exhibition on Saturday, and a limited number of tickets are available online. Despite these limitations, the pandemic didn't hamper efforts to hold this year's event. In fact, it's said to be the biggest so far, with some 440 entities from 28 countries participating in the biennial defense exhibition. Experts and senior-level military officials from over 45 countries are also taking part in the 5-day event, with various business meetings and seminars slated to be held on the sidelines. Among the items on display include the 75-ton liquid engine rocket by Hanwha Aerospace that's installed in South Korea's first fully homegrown rocket, Duri, which is slated for launch this Thursday. Also, Korea Aerospace Industries, another company involved in the development of Duri, shows off a special feature exhibition regarding advanced space capability.
To prepare for the privately led space development in Korea, the so-called New Space Era, KAI is working towards creating a value chain for the ultra-small satellite sector, which is displayed at this year's exhibition via holograms.
The exhibition was first launched in 1996 with an aim to promote the country's defense firms, as well as to enhance exchanges of global technologies. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News, Seongnam.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Former U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell passed away Monday at the age of 84 after dealing with complications from COVID-19. The retired four-star general was the nation's first black Secretary of State, who also served in other positions for a number of former U.S. presidents. Those very presidents he served under expressed their deep condolences, including George W. Bush, who said he and former First Lady Laura Bush were deeply saddened, calling Powell a great public servant, starting with his time as a soldier during Vietnam. Despite Powell's Republican background, he was not shy about endorsing Democrats, including former President Barack Obama, who said he'll always look to Powell as an example of what America and Americans can and should be if they wish to remain the last, best hope of Earth. Former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton also noted in a joint statement that Powell was a courageous soldier, a skilled commander, a dedicated diplomat, and a good and decent man. Powell served as National Security Advisor for President Ronald Reagan, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under George H.W. Bush, and finally as George W. Bush's top diplomat from 2001 to 2005. The lighting of the Olympic torch marks a special moment for the country that's set to host the international sporting event. But for China and their 2022 Beijing Winter Olympic Games, it was met with human rights activists protesting the Games as the flame was lit at Greece's Olympia on Monday. 2 women and a man were seen entering the site of the ancient Greek stadium and temple, where the Olympic flame is traditionally lit. The 3 unfurled a banner reading "No Genocide Games," as well as a Tibetan flag, seconds after the torch was lit. 4 other protesters were detained outside the stadium an hour before the ceremony, while 2 more were arrested in Athens on Sunday after protesting at the Acropolis monument. Despite the ongoing protests, IOC chief Thomas Bach stressed that the Olympic event would go beyond challenges the world faces.
The ancient Greeks understood that for the Olympic Games to take place, that for the Olympic Games to unfold their unifying power, they must stand above any political conflict. The Olympic Games cannot address all the challenges in our world. But the Olympic Games set an example for a world where everyone respects the same rules and one another.
The ongoing protests come as human rights groups and U.S. lawmakers have called on the IOC to postpone the Games and relocate the Winter Games. The very first Bitcoin-linked ETF will make its official debut at the New York Stock Exchange on Tuesday. The much-anticipated ETF will track the Bitcoin futures market in a huge regulatory feat for the relatively young cryptocurrency industry, which has long struggled to make its presence known in the highly regulated financial world. Meanwhile, 4 more ETF providers are looking to move forward with trading this month, including a second futures-based ETF as soon as this week. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Good morning. Autumn rain continues through this afternoon across much of Korea. Right now, rain clouds are dropping rain in Gangwon-do Province, Chungcheong-do, and Jeollado provinces. The amount will not be much, less than 5 millimeters, but east of Gangwon-do Province could see 5 to 30, with a slim chance of season's first snowfall in mountainous regions in Gangwon-do Province. Temperature-wise, morning temperatures are far higher than the same time yesterday, but it's going to be far colder on the way back home this evening, as lows will go down to about 5 degrees tomorrow here in the capital. But this morning, morning temperatures are starting 4 to 8 degrees higher than yesterday. Daejeon, Gwangju, Chuncheon at about 9 degrees Celsius this morning. Daytime highs will be similar to yesterday with brighter skies, but wind will make it feel colder than these actual temperatures. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that's all we have for today. Thank you for watching, and we'll be back at the same time on Wednesday, 8 a.m. Korea time with New Day at Arirang. I'm Kim Mo-gyan.
And I'm Mark Broom. I'll be back solo this time in just over an hour for our next newscast at 10 a.m. Korea time. But in the meantime, keep it tuned to Arirang TV, and we'll see you at the same time tomorrow. Goodbye.